name is Al Nardi. I am the present chairman of the Springfield Historical Commission. Today is Monday, the 16th of June. We have a special meeting. Purpose of today's meeting is to obtain whatever feedback we can hear from the public regarding the historic preservation articles that have been online for the last few weeks. Before we do that, let me just take roll call. Walter Kroll. Here. Judith Kroll.
Judy on.
There you go. Marissa, no. Vincent Walsh.
Yes, I have made it.
Yay. That's for.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And Steph, you said you had a few words you wanted to.
Yeah, so I can start with kind of an introduction where we got or how we got here, what we're doing. So as you all know, we had a consultant that came in and the purpose was to kind of reorganize and get everything in the one place with the two articles that were currently in the zoning or the city ordinance, which is chapter 49 and chapter 218 or 418. They look pretty similar. So this exercise was more or less to get everything in one place. And, and then since we're making this reorganization, also potentially throwing in a few, minor things here and there regarding processes and, potentially revisit in a future date. But I think reorganization, from what I understand, was the main purpose.
And then once we do that, the speed that we have some time frame and set up as far as when we vote.
There is no set agenda, but hopefully it will be sooner or no set timeline.
So we have one letter of information written to the Historic Commission. I'd like to read it from Springfield Preservation Trust.
Yep.
Sorry, interested regarding feedback on proposed historic preservation ordinance changes. Dear Andrew and the Springfield Historic Commission, thanks for sharing the draft of the proposed historic preservation ordinance changes. The board of the Springfield Preservation Trust has reviewed it in detail. We're going to share a few observations and suggestions to make it even better. Section 49-2, definition of historic site. It should include historic landscapes that are both natural and designed, as well as areas, lands, and parks of historic significance. If any commissioner has any commentary on any of these, you can stop me for your comments. Section 49-6. A $10 minimum fine is very inadequate to get someone's attention and even suggests a lack of seriousness. The minimum should be at least $50, if not more. Section 49-7B. Springfield Historical Society is no longer exists. Society for the Preservation of New England Antiquities is now called Historic New England. The City Board of Realtors is now named Realtor Association of Pioneer Valley. Thank you for that. Section 49-10C. The Massachusetts Historical Commission does not respond to general inquiries about if a building needs National Register criteria. It is the Springfield Historic Commission that should apply the National Register criteria through study and then submit the report to the MHC. It has to start with the local commission. We would point out that MGL Chapter 40C does not require buildings at local historic districts to be eligible for the National Register. Section 49-10F. The cost and expense to the Commission for the preparation and submission of all reports shall be levied against the applicant. The creation of local historic districts is the responsibility of the municipality, and the residents should not have to pay for it. Historic preservation has been a great asset to the city and its neighborhoods. Historic designation and districts have significantly increased the property values and thus tax revenue. The city should be encouraging further designations and protections for the benefit of everyone. Our historic homes and districts have been instrumental in attracting new people to Springfield. Thank you for reviewing and integrating these suggestions into the new ordinance. Sincerely, Terry Pasquale, President. Comments from any of the commissioners, thoughts on any of these items?
No, I thought it was good. I actually had in my notes the naming some. If this is true on 47B, that's great because I had that same thing in my notes. It didn't seem like those were right.
Well, I'd like to make a comment about the minimum fine. I agree that $10 seems, if they're not serious, just a little bit.
Or a drink at Starbucks, you can.
Yeah, almost as much as the cost. My thoughts in addition to that is that I think we should spell out actions and then what the fines could be. So that it is very clear as to why you're being fined in advance, rather than just this discussion and then coming up with a fine. I'm assuming that they paid the city of Springfield.
Yes.
Fine, should say that. And together with that, I'm thinking that when a stop work order is issued, someone comes in. Obviously, we always hear, "Oh, I didn't know." The contractors, I didn't know. I think before they leave this table, they should be requested to sign an affidavit that they are now aware of the ordinance and so forth. So, because we've had window replacement contractors come with various separate houses, and every time they didn't know. So I don't have something in writing for them before they with them. So that they can be reminded that they did sign the something. There's no other thoughts. It's very quiet here. Yeah, I actually expected.
We're gonna go. We're gonna go through this, right? I sure hope so. Okay. But I think as we go through this, things probably come up.
I mean, I can at least respond to the fines part, that this is state statute, so we're kind of more or less pinned in terms of the bounds of the minimum and maximum fines. So, and it says right here, not less than $10 or more than $500. So, and so to your point, kind of spelling out how the fine should be levied, that's where we have paragraph 2 and 3 of that section that at least provides some guidance. But there are probably some circumstances where if you're too strict, you're kind of being too harsh. So that's, but it's definitely something to talk about because it's hard to find that line.
We can review that with a lot of departments.
Yes.
Not less than, but it sounds like leeway to me. We just got to have it clarified by
Yeah, and it's the fine is per day.
Yeah.
The way it's listed is that each day is a new incident.
Right.
So even if it was
that's in that part's in different.
so, yeah.
Well, it sounds like we all kind of agree that $10 is kind of weak. We need to watch this.
Is that $10 a day?
Yeah, it's a day. They're all daily.
Yeah.
I do agree though that if we list specific actions that equals certain kinds of fines, then the statute can stand as it is, because we outlined what, and we can amend that, I suppose, as we find other, right? My concern is that if we really found an individual in a situation, it's a month later, that's a lot of money, and it may not be possible for some other people who come before us to ever dig out that list.
I mean, are you saying because it's a statute that we don't really have the authority to pick numbers and suggest numbers, or is that a legal question? Or
Based on how this reads, I would say that $10 is, you know, it sounds as if the municipality can choose what the fine is. But it has to be between 10.
So I guess the question is this the framework that we're in, and that's it,
Yeah, that's the
right? So we couldn't say if you didn't go before the commission, it's a minimum $50 fine. This could be the additional penalties if you didn't.
I think you could.
Right.
I think you could start at 50 if you want to, because it's.
I'm just asking a question. So
Yeah.
are we stuck with this framework, or could there be something suggested that adds to it?
There could be some suggestion. I would also point out that when we're looking at an ordinance,
Yeah.
you know, I found that fines and ordinances can sometimes make life harder because they're harder to amend.
Yeah.
So like once you get it set in stone, you know, we're looking at this for the next 20
Right.
years.
Well, I can't remember the last time something was levied as a penalty. I mean, you guys have been here a lot longer than I have, but I can't remember something being levied. And I
only after only by code,
and I know.
yeah.
Well, what's written in here is they came before the commission, were supposed to do things, or didn't come and didn't respond to anything. Then there would be a dollar penalty as written here. I can't ever remember hearing about that.
No, the only time we saw a penalty was to be either code violation or something. Yeah, there were a few of those that happened, but not from us. We didn't say, you know, you're gonna start paying $10 a day or $20 a day or whatever, because you didn't go along with this and these things.
So I guess the commission has to weigh the idea that they are going to institute those kinds of fines for that kind of behavior. Is that something, since we've never done that, that's a difference, or at least this group has.
Right, that's a legal department, correct, the question and answer, and then when they give us the answer, hopefully it's the one we want to hear, then we'll still be subject to a public. Maybe not. But we still have to do something like that we have to bring something in legal sense back saying, yes, you can do this. Yeah.
So, but it's in here that it states $10
Yeah, it's under
minimum.
49.
Right.
Yeah, there's two
Thought I read
levels.
that.
One's in the software quarter and the other one's
Right.
Was the wording exactly the same in the previous iteration of this?
We have, yeah,
Yeah, because I think it was combined, it was this, right?
yeah, for the most part. There's been some updated language and making sure that's consistent with state statute, but for the most part, at least with fines and penalties, that language mirrors state statute.
So you want to take these just number by number? It's yeah, obviously, people probably complain about the intent of purpose, but I think we should ask about if anyone. There's nothing really written here about. I mean, there's right here just one about definitions. Is there anybody else that has anything other than this that they want to say relative to those definitions? I think it will just run through. I think that people have said before, we're going to go through this one at a time.
Can I ask,
So then we should.
what is the format for tonight's meeting? This is not like the normal.
Nothing's gonna be voted on, so it can be, it's the whole thing is a public hearing.
Yes, so
Public.
can we just chime in whenever we want to, or how do you want to work that?
Yes,
Okay,
there's only a few of us, so yes.
yeah, okay.
They had like 3 or 4 other people that suggested they would be here sometimes.
Go ahead, please, you want to say?
Well, yeah, sure, I mean, a bunch of things, but, let me to start with, I didn't take this update and put it side by side with the older version and try to see like exactly where things are changing. Overall, what are you trying to accomplish? Is it just you feel it's time to update, or were there certain things that you were targeting to change?
Well, we didn't target anything to change. I know I did not. But it was certainly brought to our attention that there were things that should be updated, and I wasn't against it. But, I didn't. I can't tell you exactly because I can't tell you exactly what I was thinking at the time. When sometimes when people want it done, you don't do it, they want to change. Sometimes you do something that they don't want, they want to change. And that's part of why we said, well, let's look at this. And we hired outside, so it wouldn't be us saying to you guys, this is what we want to do next. It was an outside consultant who I actually did a really nice job for us. And, that we met with, they did stuff, they presented here, I think at a public meeting, they presented it. I don't know if you're here or not. And then, so now we get to add a few more things, and then we get
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but part of this was all the different districts, so McKnight, East Forest Park, right? Those all didn't have one standard.
That's correct, and I think that would be more.
That's all listed in here now, and all of them have
ordinance.
one standard now. Is that right?
Yeah, so there were 2 sections in the Springfield ordinance. There was historic, or I guess technically, there's the historic districts,
Right.
and this, and I'll show it to you. It has a little bit of what's in Article, I believe, 1 of the new ordinance, and then we have all the historic districts. It spoke nothing to regarding the type of certificates that the Springfield Commission, the Historical Commission can issue and stuff like that. So you had, for the most part, Article 1 and Article 4, which are the districts in the new version. And then you also had a separate standalone part of the ordinance, which was, it's 218 here, but it's also been known as 2 or 418, which is.
So you had a lot of things that were added and changed when they became a historic district. They didn't have all the same guidelines from the previous ones, right? So the thought was to combine them so that you can have one measure.
Yeah, we had 2 parts of the ordinance, and it was to get them in the same place, and then at least adding in some of the gaps that were existing, so that's largely what it was. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? Are you also referring to, are you trying to standardize each district, which, like the color paint that you put on your house?
Yeah,
Some districts don't care, and then others actually have to come in.
This ordinance will not touch any of the guidelines. The ordinance and guidelines are 2 separate. Guidelines will control essentially the rule that everyone has to follow. This is more process procedural standards. So so if we were to put all those guidelines in an ordinance, then if the commission ever wanted to change those guidelines and did want to put a paint standard for the McDyke district, we would have to amend the ordinance through city council to do so. Right now, with the guidelines, they can amend it via public hearing.
Yeah, the process was never to change school guidelines for existing historical districts. Processes and some of the procedures. I think it's
Well, actually, that sense, that whole area sensitized me to differences between the different historic districts, and I had never seen, in terms of the way the commission operates, any sort of sense of of those differences. You know, like haven't heard anyone say, like, well, you're in the McKnight district, so this counts here, but it doesn't count in the Forest Park district.
Some of those discrepancies, usually discrepancies may not be the right word, between the differences between them, it doesn't come up as often as you would think. I mean, paint color comes up.
Paint a lot.
That's the only
There's a
one
lot of
that
people
people
like East Forest Park is paint. If you're in McKnight, they're like, but I'm gonna paint it red. Is that okay? We're like, yeah, because
we have
not
some-
Yeah,
Right.
the paint one was the one that stood out to me. Too.
Right, and that's the only one that has ever come kind of on the tape, is the paint. And in some days, I wish we could control it.
Yeah,
Most times I agree with what they're,
Yeah.
that's the problem
Yeah.
with some of this, because some days you think it's done, it's written perfectly fine, and then something happens that kind of tosses it up, and that's what we're just trying to smooth out some of those, I don't want to say rough edges, they're not rough, just there, are what they are. But,
one review with Commissioner Wallace had suggested. In this Springfield Preservation Trust letter, it starts with the comment about historic site. Does anyone have anything they'd like to say regarding should it include historic landscapes, both natural design as well as areas, lands, parks of historic significance?
they know that, you've offered that to us before, too. Relative to.
I mean, I'm not sure if I did, but certainly, and this is just, so I'm going to be speaking later wearing my community preservation hat, but this is just my informal hat. We all saw what happened to the historic Stanford white granite bench that was at Stern Square. So Stern Square is probably a historic, should be a historic district in that sense, and it just disappeared. So there are indeed sites that are worthy of protection.
Right. We were looking at that, part of it was, does that bench fit into the potential of it now? In retrospect, we can say yes, but obviously something that it did. And in our function, there's nowhere in our purview in order to reverse that, change that. I don't think that we would have a problem if it was in the purview that something like that, the decision was made by us. It'd be no different than anything you were doing to a house. But that was ill-defined. If not, in my opinion, when I read through what we can and can't do, that was not defined by what we can to take some action on that. Which upset a few people, but it's the way, that's why we're sitting here.
So you agree that by including that, we would have some.
Well, no, I'm not agreeing necessarily to that, because the way Erica wrote it, I think is a little too broad. And there would have to be a mechanism for us to have it, not to less than automatically include things like this. There'd have to be criteria in order to go to a public hearing and then include it, and then see if it fits under our mass guidelines that we operate under anyways.
I mean, certainly right now in the proposed ordinance, the preferably preserved building or site,
Right.
so it's in there, but it says any building or site within the city which is 75 years old or older as recorded by the assessors.
Right.
No landscape is recorded by the assessors. I mean, lots are, but they don't give a year built. So if you looked at Forest Park or Stern Square or any of the parks that we have, you'd never be able to find the assessors giving an age for it. So that wording could be problematic.
I agree. We have to have something better defined. And we still have to see how it fits into the laws that we operate on any, which is the initial one. I think Bob's not on, it's right. Because I asked that question relative to the. I mean, as the chair, I was chair, and as the chair, I did not believe that it fell under our purview for what I knew of all the things that we have gone through. But it didn't mean I didn't think it should be preserved. It's completely different.
Yeah,
things.
I mean, everything I think that we have today talks more about buildings
It
as
is, yeah.
opposed to sites or artifacts.
Yeah,
You know, what is a significant bench? Is it an artifact? Is it a structure? It's certainly not a building.
Right, so,
Well, you need to work on the wordings, because when you say like historic landscapes, like when I think of a historic landscape, it could be shrubbery. Right, it could be ivy, it could be rose bushes.
it's very broad.
It's hard to define what a historic landscape is, but
Yeah.
you know, a bench of granite, you know, or a trellis or something that's an artifact is a good word. Those things kind of define something.
And the other issue, though, is that the state law specifically says landscaping with trees, shrubs, and plant material is not within the purview of any local historic commission. So,
Well, and that's right. That's kind of the other part of this, because every time you've ever had, you know, we'll put a meter here, but we'll put a shrubbery in front of it. Well,
They ask you to.
you can't. Yeah, but it's
Yeah,
not.
allowed to, but we
Right,
didn't ask you.
right, because it doesn't fall under our gig. So
But that was, sorry.
So when it comes to, when it comes to the area, the bench, the layout of the park and so forth, it should not be very difficult to identify those places, right? Just like a historic district.
And we just gotta, I don't think anybody here was against the potential to save that bench, when we saved that bench. It just wasn't in the book.
No one asked.
But if you no one asked, that's correct, but I would have, even if, when it finally came in front of me, we said, this is nothing that we have any room to over this time.
What's the word, appurtenances, something that would be used for benches.
That's the one?
Appurtenances, sure.
Well,
Let's get fancy words in there or something.
but I haven't with fancy words there, that says, you know, could be a bench, could be a shop. You can open up the publics. You know, say, tell us what you got outside your neighborhood.
Yeah.
You think it's significant? You think we should protect the screens? So add it to the list.
well, and you could certainly have something in there that says there is, you know, fountains, benches, and similar appurtenances.
Well, does that mean then that the management of those parks has to come before the historic commission to decide what they want to move around within the park?
Well, that's what. Right now, we don't have, I don't know that I would want that to be the case, but I think that I could make a case that something should be at some point be designated as a place that has to come in front of us, and just instead of a blanket saying any park has to come in front of us. That's the hard part. So if we were able to take that, we have the guidelines in the say the law in order to do that, to make that a part of that had to be protected, so that whatever they did had to come in front of us. I would be okay with that potential, except not the potential to say every park has to do it. But it's like a house. There's a house. We want to protect it now. It's not protected. How many we do? You know, we've done a few, and we did. What made it a protected thing? But right now, there's no mechanism.
but I like in this piece it does say, and parks of historic significance. And I would argue that that does happen today, and everything we've done tonight's always gone before historic. You guys have always said it has to go before the historic commission because they're deemed historic parks, right? So there is a lot of that good process kind of going on today.
So this is the new wording.
Yeah, well, the one that the Preservation Trust is using, I mean, and parts of historic significance, I think that's worded well.
But
right?
it would, I think it would be okay to include like the word about this, fountains, benches, fences, appurtenances, as determined by the commission.
Right, but that would cover the other things, but parks specifically, it's good that there's something for parks specifically. Not every park, right? But parks of historic significance, then it would be on them robust.
What
Be what the-
determines the historic significance?
Well, that's a
of
good
park?
question, but it would be the alternative. Why isn't it historic? It should be deemed historic. It is historic.
How it relates to the streetscape, how it relates, who was the designer? Why did they do it? Who slept there once? So,
Oh, we had a bunch over at Buckingham Terrace. They were famous people.
So we have memorialized the municipal protocol section of the 4914. So theoretically, this whole project, the historic structure will need to come to commission. There's also a possibility of the commission producing some sort of list of monuments or structures that can be disseminated to the departments that says, if you touch any of these items, they need to come in front of us because they've been determined a historical site under the definitions. So, those are potential ways to address, the landmarks.
it shouldn't be that hard to produce a list. For the help of the public. Well, as long as we say that list is determined by this part of that definition.
At least with municipal items, and we also have the struggle that the municipality, can be more or less exempt from a lot of projects. Yeah, so when we have department managers like we do now that are willing to come to us, yeah, they just sometimes might not necessarily know that an item's historic. For the most part, they do reach out to me asking if they need to come in front of the commission, or should they come in front of the commission.
All right, we talked about the fines, maybe going down to the changes of the names. I think we would all agree that the name should be changed as noted. 49-10C.
In Commissioner, that's one of the things I'm here to talk on, wearing my CPA chair hat. As you know, the Community Preservation Act can help us through a limited number of things, one of which is historic resources. The state law that governs CPA defines a historic resource as either something that's on the state register or has been found by the local historical commission to be significant to the community because of history, architecture, archaeology, or culture. So what we at the CPC do when someone comes to us, if they're not individually listed on the state register, we send them to you.
Yes.
And you may say, oh, they are contributing part of the McKnight district, which is on the state register. But you also have from time to time said, they're not on the state register, but we feel that they are significant to Springfield because of their history or archaeology. The committee has policies that if we're going to be recommending public money to help these historic assets, we want them permanently protected. We're not recommending $100,000 to fix a building only to find out in 10 years the new owner has remodeled it. And so we ask our people to become a local historic district, and they come to you, and probably a half dozen or so single building local historic districts have been created over the last 8 years. The problem that the committee has with this section is it puts in a requirement that districts with 5 or less buildings need to have a determination, not from you, but from the Massachusetts Historical Commission or the State Review Board or the National Park Service that they are eligible for the National Register. Now, Chapter 40C doesn't require that you be National Register eligible to be a local district. But what's even more bothering is I called the state and spoke to the staff and they said, we don't make those determinations. If someone gives us an actual application to go on the National Register, we take a vote and send it to the keeper of the National Register, and the keeper makes the decision. So this ordinance basically requires higher levels of government to do something that they don't ordinarily do. So I would foresee if this gets enacted, we could have people who come to us get a significant award for exterior renovation of a building that you've determined to be significant, and they can't get a determination out of either Mass Historic or the State Review Board or the National Park Service, and therefore they can't go anywhere.
That jumped out at me too.
The other thing that the person at Mass Historic said, in this day and age, with the cuts that are happening in Washington, to expect the National Park Service to do more than what it's done in the past is not good. So I think this whole section should be deleted.
Like to piggyback on what you said when you finished.
Yeah, so, whether it's a 400 building district or a 2 building district, it is you to look at criteria and say it's significant enough that we want to see it protected.
And just to follow up on what you're saying, what's actually what this paragraph is it takes the power out of things. You're giving up your power willingly here, and to send it to a higher power, which don't live here, so they don't know if it's significant or not. You do. And so you're actually abdicating your power to make those local decisions like this.
I would imagine they were interested in keeping this because of some tax credit. Because some federal tax credit of some sort.
I doubt that. Let me say this, many of the institutions that we have helped with CPA money that you have determined to be significant are nonprofits. And they're not doing, that federal tax credit is a wonderful program, also under threat in Washington, but a wonderful program, but it really only works for like the Indian motorcycle building size.
Yeah, it's gotta be a very large project.
It's gotta be a large project. Someone who's doing $100,000 or even $200,000 worth of work, the tax credit means nothing for them.
Well, they could still go request that.
They can still do their own National Register application should they want, but to predicate that you can't create a local district unless some higher form of government has determined that it's eligible for the National Register. These are local historic districts. You guys should be able to say the building is significant to Springfield because of its merit protection.
And you can say no, right?
Right.
Or you could say yes, but this takes that choice right out of your hands.
That's stuck out with this.
So, to give some context regarding this section, there's fairly a misunderstanding of maybe some of the process here, but there's tension between potentially having, hundreds of local historic districts that are unmanageable from a staffing standpoint. And while hundreds seems over exaggerated, there is one town in Massachusetts that has over 200 single historic districts in it. So, on top of Mass Historic coming back just with the Bernie Keller lay blocks, recommending larger districts, it's not to necessarily potentially prohibit, single building districts. It's just we want to be careful on how many we have, because if there's too many, it becomes, a potential staffing and administrative issue. So, this part, can definitely be looked at further, to, meet both,
It's another one of the things that see both sides of fairly quickly. Should we do every single person for some reason who wants to do it? And the larger area is generally beneficial. But at the very least, because that jumped out at me the first time I went through this, and so that's just not going to do it.
But
When they do, it's going to take so long. The house is going to,
let me say two things. One is, Massachusetts does not have what's called the landmarking ordinance, which is like New York City. What Massachusetts does is Chapter 40C contains right at the beginning a local historic district may be a building or buildings.
Right.
So they've always allowed it.
Yeah.
And what the issue is we, the Community Preservation Committee, that want to see the asset that government money's gone into protected, we don't have the ability to say, well, not just you have to make sure that all 12 of your neighbors are part of the local. You can't do that.
Right.
We're hoping to get the individual building protected. And if they need more staff, they need more staff to administer it.
I'm not sure if it makes sense to anticipate that it's going to be so bad you can't take care of it, and then you do nothing.
there also is, as an alternative, the preservation restriction as well.
Well, sure, I was going to go there. Yeah, I was just going to ask that question. The CPC money that is given out, they're given out with a deed restriction?
No. So the option is either a local historic district or a preservation restriction. And a preservation restriction, if you want to make it perpetuity, which is obviously the optimal thing, is a lengthy process. You can create a local historic district, as we have done with many of our single building districts like Willis Overland and National Needle in about 6 months. To get a preservation restriction signed by Mass Historic is certainly over a year.
Almost 2.
So
Plus, it still has to be filed with the deed.
Okay, that just surprises me a little bit. If somebody who owns a house wants to have you said again, money. If they want to have a preservation restriction on the property, why can't they issue that themselves? Sounds like a funny question, but I mean, if somebody, if I own a house and I want to put a preservation restriction on it,
and on your own deed.
why can't?
well, you can put on a deed restriction and a preservation restriction.
Deed restriction.
So
I'm using the wrong word.
they can't. Deed restrictions, however, are only enforceable by the person who's given them. So if you put a deed restriction on your house, and then 2 years from now you die,
It's gone.
it's you're the one who gets to enforce what's done on it.
Sorry. So, and what's the other one? How's the other one?
The preservation restriction is held by either a government entity like the Springfield Historical Commission or a nonprofit preservation entity like the Springfield Preservation Trust. And it can be held for less than perpetuity, if that's what it says, or perpetuity. But what it means that if someone violates it, it's just like violating something in a local historic district. You have to take action against them. If the Preservation Trust held the restriction and someone vinyl sides a house that's got a preservation restriction on it, and they do it without permission, the trust has to take action against them.
I thought the deed restriction had to be accepted by a court decision. And then it became in perpetuity, no matter how many times it was said.
I am not a lawyer. My limited knowledge is I have a little cottage up at Hamden Ponds that I put a deed restriction on that it couldn't be vinyl sided and it couldn't be enlarged. And my understanding is if I were to kick the bucket tomorrow and the owners decided there's no one who can enforce that restriction other than me, the person who put it on the deed, and that it's only good for 30 years.
Now, the preservation restriction, we've seen a few of those come across here, not related to what we were doing. Like the fire station at Sumner Island, I think that was one, fire station, they never filed it. As far as I heard, they never completely filed it. But I didn't know that it doesn't come, someone else doesn't come across the desk of your chair, it is how long it takes the state to do things, you don't really know. But it just, you know. Right.
And the steps involved too are greater and more complicated, and somebody has to do it. So you need a lawyer, and
Well,
then
I'm not against somebody who owns property who wants that to do with the steps they have to take to get
Right.
it done. It's not our job to take that off their plate. That's what they want to do.
right, correct, I agree.
And I think that option right now, sitting here today, looking at all this stuff, that some of it I love, some of it I hate. You already know that part. That seems like an easier route for somebody who wants that done on their house.
But what we're not concerned about someone's house, because any of the grants we give out in the Historic Homes Program, they're already in a local historic district. What we're concerned about are the outside buildings that are, applications that are coming out, not for homes, but for public buildings, school buildings.
That's crossing a whole nother place.
So what is it? That's our choice, either a local historic district or a preservation restriction, like for,
Right, so you're not talking the public, you're talking about. But not just somebody who has
So we're talking
a
about
house
the
get
people
money.
we're talking about the people who receive CPA money.
like the Brookings School.
No, right, but I'm talking.
Talking about
I receive
residential,
it
we're
from you
talking
as an
about
individual
schools.
for my house.
Yeah.
And if I want that, I should be able to pursue it, but that's different. than
Absolutely,
the
right.
School, yes. Well, it's just another delineation that we'd have to figure out here. But I don't think the answer is having us make everything a historic district, and that's part of what that's after. Even though I don't like the way this is written either, there should be a mechanism that we can supersede that if we want to, maybe something additional to say, look, we want this to proceed over and above this. But in general, I don't.
Well, the commission could decide whether it has a preliminary review and then sends it further.
Yeah, well, we're not going to be able to write that tonight, no. But I got to make some.
I'd just like to know what kind of language you would like to see and where in this document. So do you have anything that you have drafted that we could look at?
No, I mean, my comment is here is to delete section C.
Right.
And what is the process at the moment? In other words, so section C, did section C exist?
No.
I didn't think so. So this is an addition.
This is an
And
addition.
if we take it out, how has this proceeded before without this being there?
People have come to you and you've determined that they are significant. They then come to us and ask for money. We, in many cases, have recommended them to city council, who grants the money. And then we require them to come back to you to say, we now want to be designated a local historic district.
Has that ever been a burden to us in the past?
Burden's the right word.
No, I meant the thing that,
Well, you might have 2 or 3 on the agenda.
so in the years that the commission has functioned, it hasn't been a significant problem for us. I know that the concern is that it might become hundreds of districts, but it hasn't. And we're a pretty good sized city. So maybe we just take it out.
So
Why fix something that isn't broken, is what I'm saying.
I mean, I think in terms of Community Preservation Act districts, there have probably been over the 8 years, maybe a half dozen of them over 8 years. This particular funding cycle, as of last Monday, City Council funded work to, I'm going to say, 3 or 4 buildings as historic resources. So we would be looking for them. Many times the buildings are already in local historic districts, so they already have protection. We don't ask to be re-protected, but certainly, I don't. It does not. It's not like there's a huge slew of them coming out every year.
I sort of feel the same way you do, Ben. I would be really shocked. We had 100 of them on the agenda.
I don't think it would necessarily. I think you run into a situation where I'm not thinking, 5 years from now. I'm thinking 100 years from now, and then you have, every other street on Myers in a historic district. It's
Hopefully,
a standalone.
I'm worried about that. Then the entire city might be historic district.
Well, Andrew, but isn't there, it seems like, I think the conversation that we had, is that you're looking to expand certain areas where there are a good number of.
I mean, that's not necessarily a standalone decision. I use Byers Street as my example, just because there's already going to be like 5 in that area with a National Historic District over it. Yeah, this was one area I was looking at, but this was really the only area I was looking at, potentially consolidating and cleaning up, because we were going to have, we have this extension of Federal Square, and that comes up Byers, then the Thurston Munson, and then the Bernie Lane Taylor block. We're going to have, a stretch right here where we'll have 3 different historic districts. And then, over time, like I said, 100 years from now, this might be filled in even more, and would have been better served with an entire district rather than just single districts.
I wouldn't disagree with you, but the bottom line, Andrew, is other than State Street, the city of Springfield has not itself initiated a local historic district for probably 40 years. Individuals have asked for it. The Community Preservation Committee has told its recipients to ask for it. There are the trustees of the Historic Preservation Fund, which is the group that administers the casino. They have the same policy. So there have been small districts created, but the city hasn't. I would welcome a Byers Street district, but until the Taylor Bernie Lay block was sent down to Mass Historic, City of Springfield wasn't interested in creating any local historic districts other than they did State Street.
Yeah, and I can say, from my experience, I think a legal instrument like a preservation restriction actually serves the need, the end goal better than a local historic district, because it will always travel with the property, and when someone is buying that property, they will have that in that title.
It has to be achievable.
Yeah.
It can't be, it sounds to me like there's unintended consequences. It sounds like this is good intention, but it makes it punitive to somebody to try and preserve it to a point where the preservation restriction is like either a long process or extremely expensive, or both for them. It's not functional.
Yeah, and again with this part, maybe needs to go back to the drawing board and make sure
Because
that
it's got to be functional, right?
Yeah.
Anything, any change.
Yeah.
I mean, nothing's perfect, but it shouldn't be burdensome where a process that's been working and
Yeah.
you worry about, caught in the wheels. If it suddenly creates an issue where now the property is at risk, where now you put the burden back on the homeowner, for a long period of time. I mean, that doesn't sound like we really understand what all of that is, but We don't wanna do that either, right?
And, from what I could gather in working on the Indian Orchard preservation restriction, for the most part, it can be templated. And a lot of that seems like language you can regurgitate it or regurgitate, so you can update it, and then it's a matter of looking at the deed description and getting a document of your deed, and then having a few more exhibits. So it doesn't look, and maybe it's just because of my background, but it didn't look too impossible, especially if we can have a template. Like from when I was looking at one of my resources, almost every single one of those documents were templated probably off of one another. So, and we're balancing, I think we're balancing two things. We want to make sure that we're not locking out people to have access to CPC, which I completely respect and want to make sure that doesn't happen. At the same time, we're also balancing making sure we don't turn into a municipality with hundreds of districts. I don't think it's going to happen overnight, but you potentially, way down the road, will end up with a scattershot of districts.
Can you tell me how often this ordinance is updated?
Not with me around 30 years.
I wouldn't be
13 years. Not much has been.
Probably, this ordinance, every time there's a new local historic district, that's an update to the ordinance. So in terms of changing any other of the verbiage, probably 1972 when it was first adopted.
Right. But it seems to me, I hate anticipating disasters. So I think it's good to plan and to prevent, and I understand your concern that we end up with this checkerboard of historic sites. But I think that's something that a future group in 20 years can look at again and update that or find a different way to handle it, which may be to make sections of the city historic. I mean, if we really have 90% of the city as individual little houses, then you have an argument for a very different approach to creating a large district. But if we anticipate it and add a lot of regulations that keep people from being able to claim it, it seems like we're really are burdening a homeowner who might need this money very much and can't access it easily, no matter how easy it seems to you. It's not necessarily for someone who doesn't have your extraordinary training in planning and in other areas. So I would find that I would go to a lawyer and I would be paying a lot of money. And I have a lot of education, but I don't know anything about this kind of stuff.
I guess I would also add that a local historic district has the advantage of that Chapter 40C says the building commissioner cannot issue any permits in a local district until the historical commission has issued a certificate. You've got a backup in that sense. A preservation restriction does not carry that requirement. That person can just go and pull a building permit, and the building commissioner would say, not my problem. But with a local historic district, he is, in a sense, enjoined by law from issuing the permit until you've issued a certificate.
But there's nothing to say that the commission can't be looking at a property, deciding that it wants the input of Mass Historical or whatever before it makes the determination.
Right.
So
You will not get a determination out of Mass Historic until you send them a study report. And then they'll give you their feedback. Within 60 days is required by law.
maybe a $10 bill.
A $10 bill from 1972 might do it. Not from.
So speaking of money, I do want to jump into one thing that Eric had mentioned is the $1,500. Specific.
That's coming up next. That's your this one.
Okay.
Okay, well, I was just about to say that. Let's move on a little bit. Go to the next part, the cost and expense to the commission.
Kind of a preparation for what you have to say.
Well, I'm going to turn it over
Yeah.
to Bob because he has to.
Unfortunately, I have a 7 o'clock meeting to go.
That's all.
You know, I used to be the staff at the planning department for 30 years, and in the 1970s, one of my roles was staffing the Springfield Historical Commission. And during that time frame, I was there when the Forest Park Heights Historic District was created, the McKnight Historic District, and the 3 districts along Maple Street, Maple Hill, Ridgewood, and Lower Maple. The planning department did the studies, period. I wonder what chilling effects would have had on preservation in Springfield in the 1970s if this proposed that citizens pay the cost were in place. What would have happened to Walter, to McKnight, if you were told, gee, it's a 400 house local historic district, that's going to cost $15,000 for that study. You've got to come up with the money. If the people in Forest Park were told, oh, that's 600 houses, that's the consultant's given us the quote of 20,000. What would have happened to historic preservation in Springfield if this requirement had been there since the beginning? I find this to be a very anti-preservation movement. So, short of that, and that's with just my old city planning hat, not my CPA hat, comment.
Well, where did this, why did this come up?
This,
Two reasons. And or maybe I'll add to this. One, we don't have a budget. And it costs money to get where it goes.
Yeah. Let me just say,
They have no money. They might.
planning found $35,000 to hire the consultant who did this report. So we find the money that we want, and we don't find the money that we don't.
And you stand your money.
Yeah, yes. And with that, unfortunately, I have to go.
Can we ask CPC for the money for
Your reports. Thanks for coming in. I appreciate it. It's going to be probably a longer haul than we all wanted to be because I have the old one right in front of me and I'm reading that after this. And I had never, I read this several times, just to be familiar with it. You forget everything that's in this original one. So, we got some issues.
It sounded more to me when that's written, because we're still balancing the homeowner who's trying to get something done versus a developer. So if I'm a developer and I'm going to do a $3 million project, get tax credits and get all this other stuff.
No big deal, right? 1,500.
That's why should the city pay for it? This guy's got money. He's doing a bunch of stuff. Why would the city once again pay for something that this person is getting? Historic demarcation to get money for, because he's going to do state and federal historic grants and any other thing he can get, right? So why should the city pay for the grant when the developer should pay for the grant? But I do have a hard time with somebody that's get $20,000 from for applying for CPC and it's taxable. And now I gotta pay for a study or something. That's concerning.
So I hear what you're saying, but in the case of if a developer is going for federal tax credits, I mean they have to get their own preservationists, and all that information would be done pretty much anyway. But I mean for us, it puts a barrier up to preservation because New Bethel Church on Dwight Street. It's an old church. And we're trying to create a local historic district there for the past few years while all of this nonsense is going on. They don't have 2 cents over there. Right? So now we're gonna create this burden for them of $1,500, or they can't get the CPA grant, or we lose the historic resource. That's really kind of what it comes down to. So is there a happy medium where if it's a larger project, I mean, I don't know, but
I
I think 1,500 is really steep.
I was going to interject with the thought that if in fact it's a project that's being handed to a preferred developer or a developer, the language should just say you'll bear the cost of all these items. That's part of the deal. You want to be a preferred developer, it's going to cost you $1,500. Oh, you're a homeowner? See what we can do.
But it's not just the homeowner, it's also
small buildings like that church,
you know what I mean?
Well, the small
Yeah.
property. You're talking about if you're being given a great opportunity to be a preferred developer in property.
Yeah, she's not against that, she's talking about somebody like the church.
No, I know, but
So they're not
but
gonna
the
be a
church
preferred
would not be
developer.
called preferred developer.
but that would, this language would supersede that, right? The way it's written now. So we instead of saying, the way this reads, everyone falls under it.
Right.
So in a city contract, like the one that's coming up for you, Walter, the city would put into the contract preferred developers, and these are your responsibilities,
Yeah.
and they could put it in there.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's something that has to be written in that document, or the city would, that's just one of the things they include if it's a historic property.
Well, we would have to exempt. But we would have to say that if it was that type of project, then the developer is responsible
Or
and holding an agreement with the city.
Then you just allow an exemption,
That's what I'm.
and then you make the decision on whether to allow the exemption or not, but because you now have the power still to do that. So maybe you don't have to say this size we will, this size no, just like an exemption. And then
Based on what? I think that's my concern. People will argue, particularly people with a lot of money, will argue that they should be exempt because they're doing this great thing for the city. So if there is, right now we have hardship as a way to help us determine if a particular property can not have to meet all of our requirements. What would be your thoughts on the criteria for such an exemption?
I would just suggest that the criteria would be if they're getting something from the municipality.
yes,
Well,
I
if
think
they're
that
getting-
that's, yeah,
but that would include,
The small church isn't getting anything from the municipality.
what about the people who, okay, I see.
Yeah.
So the people who get the grants, that kind of thing.
If you get a grant, if you're a preferred developer, if the CPC gave you $100,000, or you've gotten something already from the tax.
Ah,
The tax
okay.
payments.
Then the responsibility kicks in. Right. Okay.
And if you're the little church and you've never gotten anything, you're just trying, then perhaps we can.
hold on, so you're gonna say our CPC people will have to pay that?
They're getting something, they're getting
Um,
tax dollars.
Well, again, that would be depend if it's a large developer like Brookings School, right, that came in, then that's one thing. But if it was New Bethel Church that came in, they're still receiving community funds.
How much are you getting?
They got less than 100,000, and last time I think it was about that same. You haven't seen the work there.
Well, I understand that. But compared to the homeowner or the little church, yeah,
The homeowner doesn't come into this at all, so I'm not following why you keep.
or
bringing
the
up-
small building owner.
Do any small single family people get any money from it?
The one, we have a historic
Yeah.
homes restoration
Yeah.
program, as you know.
Yeah.
And those are only for people in the historic district. So it's a lottery, they come to us,
So
they
don't
get
go
lucky.
outside of the
So,
district.
right, there are.
Don't go outside of the
That's
district.
just-
So there is no
outside,
reason,
somebody has-
right,
just-
yeah.
I thought that was the case, I just
Yeah,
didn't know
it is.
that changed.
And thank you for your work on that, by the way, and Andrew, for kind of pushing those through so they could.
Yeah, I apologize for doing this, we should have done this a while ago, but we haven't given anybody's name and address for the record, we're supposed to do that. So, if you could just say, just say your name and address for the record. It's a
Sure,
requirement.
Karen Lee, 18 Lawn Street, Springfield, Community Preservation Consultant.
It's refueling report, so before people speak, they're supposed to do it. And this is very informal, so we
Yeah.
really didn't get to it. And I mean, it's informal, I like it that way. There are clearly things here. I'm looking at the original. I'm not gonna get into the read the next hour to people, important to see.
Well, let's say, is there anyone else who'd like to say anything about any other
Just
issue?
finish up one thing, back to the $1,500, that I think is really a barrier to preservation, is what that is. Okay, now I lost train of thought.
I'll go back 2 sentences. Is there anyone else who'd like to suggest something else?
Yeah, I have a number of things, but I have a different perspective on this because in a couple of ways. One is I'm with Forest Park Civic Association, so we're not really concerned about like creating trusts and
Name and address?
I'm Harry Seymour and Forest Park Civic Association, is that enough?
Oh, man.
Home address.
68 Washington Road in Springfield.
Thank you.
So, some of my concerns were things that I feel a little bit like I'm the 6th grader in a graduate school class here. We're not those kinds of issues. My questions are things around like, when we talked about penalties, who actually applies fines? If there are, like I said, we haven't. Who actually does
I
that?
believe it's staff, it could be well,
We haven't done this.
We haven't done one, so
We've done this.
They've never found it.
Yeah, well, I know. I've never heard it.
was one of the questions that had to be reviewed on. And once there is some proposed penalty, like how does it get enforced? And then how do we have a policy on what's appropriate? Because we haven't done one, so that's like a whole other thing.
Okay. All right. So, and there are a number of sections dealing with historic commissioners. How do you become a commissioner? And there's language in there like 1 member from 2 nominees. Do we follow that? I mean, are there usually 2 nominees? It seems like we've been like working really hard to just get a nominee.
Well, part of it, because I've been fighting that battle for 8 years, as you know. If I represent the Realtor Association,
Yes.
that's 1 seat on this board.
Right.
The whole thing behind that is they can nominate, Realtor Association can nominate 2 people for that seat, and then they pick 1. And so that there's a choice even there, but there's still only 1 seat.
Yeah.
I think if you read that, most of that says that.
Yeah.
That it's multiple nominations for the 1 seat.
Yeah, no,
designated.
I understand that there.
So why
the
does
state statute too.
so what is that? So I must have missed your question. Must have misunderstood why you
Not, well, I've been.
You can't fill the seats we have now.
We can't fill the seats, so why are you
Exactly.
limiting?
You can't fill the
qualification.
seats.
have to be
So why have language in there that says you have to have 2 nominees?
We have statutory.
It mirrors state
Yeah.
statute.
It's
statutory.
It's statutory, but what if 2 from 1 organization wanted to? They would give the right for 2 people to submit an application if they wanted to be on instead of us just cherry picking, we want that one, the other one doesn't have the right to apply. I could argue either side of that pretty easily, but we don't have enough people as it is. So if somebody puts through one nomination, we'll be happy. The mayor can do something with it. That's I could bitch about that one, but I won't.
And an expansion of that same area. Why not have something in the ordinance giving you the selection process, giving the commission
Interview process or something.
yeah, the interviewing process and the selection of who's going to be on the commission. Why not? Why is that
There's election type concept.
delegated to somebody else? Because I know that in the past, when you haven't had as many commissioners as you do now, you have 6, that we have kind of taken it on ourselves to try to prod the mayor and to get into the queue of things that have enough priority to get him to do what, to bring people forward. Like, why not take on more of that at the commission level? Why not have it in the ordinance?
So you're suggesting that somebody should be able to come to us and we can send them to the city council for approval?
Yeah.
But we all, at this point, I think that's a statutory thing too, that we serve at the pleasure of the mayor, and that's why it starts with the mayor.
Right.
We can't bypass that, I don't think, but you might be able to find that in general law or something.
Well, I was thinking about the selection of people to go to the mayor, that there's this responsibility within the commission or someone.
I have every single person who's ever asked me how to get it, I've given them information, sent it to them. And whether they talk to the mayor or the mayor does anything, it's a whole different thing. That's not a lot of people, by the way, it's probably 5 people. But at least 5 people I've said, please go and follow this process. Well, I don't think we should be allowed to select them. That's part of just stacking a commission in your favor. If we got to choose and we got to pick whoever we want, we could either be a hard line
It goes the other
one
way
way or
too.
hard line the other.
Well, it goes the other way too, that somebody else who doesn't know as much as you know about how the commission operates and what's important to be a good commissioner, that if that person is selecting people, then that's not a good process either.
Right.
I'm actually arguing for responsibility, that like the chair of the commission be responsible for coming up with nominees, not selecting the commissioners, but to come up with the nominees that go before the mayor or go into the city council.
And then you're talking about changing actually chapter 16, boards and commissions, that whole
Yeah, there's a lot.
yeah, I mean, the CPA, we don't, the mayor does not appoint our people. But I think it's the only committee that's like that, but everything else, yeah, it goes through the mayor and then approved by the city council, so.
At the pleasure of.
I think it would be very hard.
But I think
Yeah.
Kerry's thought is an interesting.
Well, I think in a way, although you might not think so, in a way, we already do this.
Right.
It just hasn't, it's
Not formal.
manifested so positively lately because we're having, people that some people don't want to do it. I mean, when I was nominated 13 years ago, I thought it would be a good thing. I'm still.
Yeah, reached out, Vincent. Have you contacted the preservation groups and asked them to send a member?
Have I? Are you saying I haven't?
Oh, just that.
No, because that's not where I would reach out. I would reach out to citizens of the city, people who live here to be on it, not people who already believe in preservation. That's not as right either. This has to have some pragmatism to it. It can't be an all or none, one way or the other. You have to have. That's why I like having somebody completely disagrees with me to disagree with me in a public meeting, because that way you're going to get the best decision overall. When you do that, if we all agree on the same thing all the time, somebody's going to get railroaded some way or another, either to get it or to not get it.
New perspectives.
There's no new perspectives. That's correct. So, sorry, it was my answer.
Okay.
You thought.
Yeah.
Well, there was a little accusation in there, so I had to answer it. But she's smiling, I'm smiling.
So in 49.8A3, okay, it talks about the commission having the power to arrange for the preparation of publicly printed matters relating to historic sites, structures of the city. So, and like walking tours. So, is the commission actually doing that? Commission actually actively trying to, come up with publications, take on the responsibilities of things like walking tours.
There was years ago, way back in the 80s, in the walking tours but I hadn't seen one promoted by the commission in a long time.
I think the commission could be helped in the general public here by creating things that lend a positive air to what's going on. And I think partly one of the things that you come up against when people come in here is their resistance to the whole thing. They don't even want to be a part of historic, and sometimes they don't realize they are a part of an historic district. But why not take on some of that responsibility of doing things? And I don't know if you can get money out of the city or not, because it doesn't say that you would get any money, but it does say that you could apply for it.
This is a new thing that we're writing in, right?
Just take a look. Yes, there is.
Is this existing or is this,
Yeah,
was this already there?
I thought this was a new thing.
It's under powers?
It's scary. I don't know if I had the cross references, what was where, I could probably.
49.8.
This is the new
Well,
one.
it doesn't research.
He's looking at the old one.
Oh,
He's looking at the old.
it's a different number.
Yeah, it'll be a different number. In back to the pragmatic part of doing this, Harry.
Yes.
You've been watching this a long time,
Yes.
and believe me, we appreciate it.
No.
It may not sound like it, because as a chair, you have to you gotta pick your battles. You gotta choose your priorities. And there was a point when we had what's his name there, and they no on the commission. He did the video and stuff like that. And we had talked about the potential of putting something together, and there was a suggestion that we go to the schools. And I, just for the record, again, I volunteered that I would present if we got a slideshow or video presentation. I would be happy to go.
Oh, Brian.
I used to, Brian.
Brian.
Thank you. But asking us to produce something like that is, to me, is just putting an onus that doesn't belong on us. If it were there, I'm sure we'd get people to, I would love to go out and teach people about this preservation, but I can't make something I can't do it.
Yes, but you could, if you had money, you could do it. You could hire someone to do it.
Well, that's true, but then that gets back to the original problem, is that we don't get money.
Conceptually,
Why not?
Conceptually, this board needs a bridge. And you're right, because
Yeah.
and the only bridge that really exists right now is the Preservation Trust, because we can't tell people how to do a project. We can't show people a list of GCs. We can't talk to people about projects. We can't lesson them. We can't direct them. We're kind of the referee with handcuffs on. But I feel like we need some kind of bridge to that can educate and help people and bring some of that out. A lot of the bylaws and stuff that we have prevent us from doing that, right? And I know this is off topic from where you're at, but I feel like the board needs a bridge to empowerment.
Well, and
right?
Brian had some good ideas on that too, because that's what he did for business. He had some good ideas. Just a presentation to explain to
I mean,
high school kids what preservation is, not what we allow.
right, and it's the same thing with homeowners, because homeowners usually learn the hard way that there's an oversight committee and you did something that you weren't supposed to. And they don't know anything about windows, they don't know anything about doors, and they kind of have to learn it the hard way. And they come here and they're like, well, we can't tell you what to do, figure it out. Up to this guy, maybe he can help you out.
Right.
We don't have there isn't a bridge for this group to try and fill in the blanks for people. The nice thing is at least the trust website has contractors that people have done for mason, for chimneys, for roofs,
Because it's a big no-no.
right? It's a very big no-no, but it's a big giant black sucking hole because homeowners don't have
No,
anything to do with. We have like handcuffs and duct tape on because we can't say anything, right? So there's this giant gap. So
Right.
how do you bridge that gap? And I'm not saying it's this because we don't have the bandwidth to fill in the blanks with some of that, but that's a big problem.
Right.
So
It's a
let
big
me
problem.
ask you, if you're gonna charge your $10 a day or whatever, can any of that money be earmarked? Or does that just go into the
General
general fund?
Fine's always going to be the general.
So even if it's specific having to do with historic,
Well, if the ordinance said it could be set somewhere else.
Well,
we can't elect it to go
it's a-
somewhere else. It has to.
But it's a good point to
Well, it's a
say.
great question.
It's a good point to say if, doesn't have to go into the historic coffers, but we never find anybody. If we did find somebody, there'd be some revenue to offset some things instead of ask, right? Because now you can actually say, even if it's $10, it's $10 more than we never collected.
so Andrew, can you put that
Right.
in there somewhere, that money,
I mean,
collected?
Whether it's earmarked or not, the fact that the commission has some kind of,
Income.
revenue could be discussed against an offset.
Right, but our only option to get revenue is to request it from the city.
Yeah, I
That's
just,
it, there's no other way.
Yeah.
I mean, the city could change that, but we can't. We can't put it in there and it would be enforceable. But
I'm thinking too that there's a downside to that. That in fact, the more you talk about bringing funds back into the commission, the more you're likely to find people, and then you're in that quandary of people saying that you're just finding
Yeah,
people. to
you
get
guys are
money.
just looking at, yeah,
thank you.
yeah.
Put money back to your.
And now you're not saying, and now we are the hysterical commission, right? And we're looking for
Yes,
We're looking for
But
ways
that's what you're
to
up
self-generate,
the
right?
historical commission is what you're up against.
Yeah.
And we want to change that. We can help change that from the historic districts ourselves, from the preservation trust, from everyone who's involved. But the commission could also be involved, and the commission might have more clout as far as getting money out of the city than some of us would.
We have asked in the past, I can't be specific today, what we have asked for things for. If Bob was here, he could tell us, because he was on it.
Yeah.
When we got. But, I mean, if I had to start at the top of this, the first thing I'd fix is the number of menus and members in, sorry.
Yeah.
It's hard not to be king, right, brother? He doesn't stop you, see.
Speak up.
It's hard to unchair yourself after 8.5 years.
Unchair yourself, that's.
It really is. So go ahead, sorry. It's your turn. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I just think that there are some things that we could do that I agree that what we aren't able to do is talk about the impact of our regulations on making things more beautiful and more historically correct in our areas. But there is something we could request, and that is, I'm just thinking of one of the gentlemen who came here and certainly upgraded his design a great deal because of the input from the commission. And now it's going to be quite a nice project, I think, if he finishes it. I know the Preservation Trust gives awards, but I'm thinking of something more along the line of encouraging people to send us photos of finished work that we could log, that we could put on the site and just say, excellent work done by blank blank. or met all of our requirements, and look at how lovely. I think that there's nothing positive that comes out of here, nothing that says this was really good. And saying that to people doesn't make a difference, but seeing it, I think would.
Yeah.
So at least it's an inexpensive, they're sending us a photo, it's all volunteer, of what they did to upgrade their house, whether it is new shingles and a paint job, but it makes the before and after look better. Why not say thank you? It isn't of the level of the Preservation Trust stuff.
But it's a marketing.
Still positive.
It's,
Yeah,
it's,
it's
it's
marketing,
taking the marketing perspective on,
Right.
on what's going on here.
It's like cleaning the house.
So
Nobody
you-
knows it, but if they saw how dirty it was before and you clean it, then it really makes you happy.
So you're saying the whole mediation thing, they leave, no one had a fist fight, isn't working?
No. I think it leaves, I think it leaves people.
I think it's
So
It's
do you
easy to
have
achieve.
like a Facebook page? You can like the communications development office and that.
We have a site on the
Where you
city
have-
website, right?
Yeah,
yes.
and it would be
Yeah, that's-
easy to just
Yeah.
invite people to
It's a
submit.
I don't think we have a
their report.
Facebook page, but I think we have
I
a
think
site on the city website.
Winter project.
Facebook would be good.
a lot of people don't do Facebook.
No, I know.
I was gonna say, probably, I have no
I'd rather
idea
go
about
on-
that, they rules with a law about that, but I have no objection to that, just.
Because that's an easy thing for people to drop it into, right? And then promote it, so.
And they send it, it's uploaded. If we don't have to do it the second they do it, even if we do a little at a time. That's a kind of an intern kind of thing. But
You could give
Yeah, I think your offer to spearhead such a thing is immensely benefit. So get Harry. That's it. Get Harry back.
Okay, I accept, because I think if the commission
You're here.
isn't showing the world what the impact of their guidance
Right.
is.
I would work with you.
Yay! I got a second.
Yes.
Okay, so that's what I'm thinking. Printed materials aren't gonna make a difference, but
Yeah.
a picture online.
Goes a lot. So, Commissioner Judith, if you're listening to us, I haven't had an opportunity to ask you if you have anything to say.
I am listening, and I have different thoughts. It's so easy, right, for people to, on the outside looking in. This is no slight on anybody or no shade, but this is a volunteer position, and I really appreciate being on this commission, and I really think we just try to do the best we can with what we have. And sometimes it's the difficulty for me is, people who have, homes in historic districts and balancing who needs what, and somebody wants money for this, so they want to make it a historic district. I just think everything we're talking about right now, we really have to assess what this means. Somebody wants to take this out so they can work with this, and somebody wants to remove that. At the end of the day, I'm just a volunteer. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a legal expert. But I think some of the asks that I'm hearing are going to require more than just a vote. It's just going to require many more things, and that's all I'll say for right now.
Thank you, Judith.
I didn't remember what I was gonna say.
Please.
And it was actually directed towards Andrew. So when the Bernie Lake law,
Yeah.
Bob and I created that.
Yeah.
So we did all the work. I took the pictures.
Yeah.
And then submitted it. And then I think you put in the maps, like the official maps into it. And then it was all set to go. So as the community preservation, we don't have any problem if you need us to do that.
Mhm.
So, and that's not, or you could pay me $1,500. Yeah, that'd be awesome. So that is that what the 1,500 is? Is actually doing the local historic district process?
Yeah, I mean, I think the general mindset is that the report should be generated from our office, if not third party out, so contracted out. So, there's staff, and this kind of goes back to what we were discussing earlier with creating these districts. There's limited staff time. We're getting more and more applications, which requires more and more prep for the historic commission on top of stop work orders, creating the decisions, doing the minutes, prepping the commission, and then, if you end up throwing in, these reports, if you do hit an off year where there's 3 reports all of a sudden, that's going to end up being a low priority just based on the frequency this board meets. And so, I think we're looking at who's doing the work to set up these districts. So they lay with a preservation restriction, which would be not part of the city, but it would be the task of the person that is applying for the money, or is it limited staff? And I don't think there is opposition doing the work. It's just from a practicality standpoint, we're going to fall short somewhere. Yeah.
Well, it
Yeah.
sounds like you need more help, like you need an additional employee or at least a half.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say, it's not just,
Because
our
here's the
planning
thing,
side
Andrew.
of the department. It's citywide. Like, where are we expending those positions? It's something that every department fights at every municipality year after year. So,
But what I guess one of the things that bothers me is that you're ready to put this burden on the regular person, this $1,500, when and you want to just like push off those costs on people, right? Instead of looking at it and saying, okay, we have 10, and that's already cost, I don't know, $10,000 or whatever. So you keep hiring out people, hiring out for consultants, hiring out for people to do this, which costs the regular taxpayer more money, right? Instead of having an adequately staffed and prepared department, you're pushing these costs off on the residents, and it's regressive to do that.
and I mean, those decisions are obviously made higher than me. So, in my perfect world, I'd be going above and beyond probably what the normal municipality would have for a planning staff, but I'm also insanely biased because this is the position I'm in. But yeah, I mean, I generally agree. I mean, it's that, it's always, this is an unusual ask that not the normal landowner is coming in and requesting, saying, we want you, municipality, to create a district. So, that's not your typical, I want to go file an application with the historical commission, which, so, it's.
Well, I think it was Anna that said that it is the responsibility of, I think it was you, or was the is the responsibility of the city to create historic areas and to preserve them. It is your responsibility. So
It's this is where, this is tug of war, right? City council ultimately has the decision on which areas it's going to be preserved. So, and then, at that point, they should be looking at, okay, what do we need to preserve these areas? So, again, those decisions are unfortunately above me.
you guys have a lot of work to do, and like Judy said, you are a volunteer committee. So I'm going to stop now.
Yeah.
But I just want you to know that if it has to do with our people, we could do those reports, at least, the welcome.
And I would like to say that I am very cognizant on the what an applicant slash landowner resident needs to go through permitting processes. I sympathize. I worked in Rutland, Vermont, which is very similar to Springfield.
So I know that.
So
I've been there.
yeah. So like it is the financial capacity, I definitely understand, and it's not my intention to gouge landowners. That's not what I would like, and I think you would find that as well. It's there's a cost somehow, some way. It's just figuring out how do we best accommodate it. So
Right, so, we're coming up to close to 2 hours, I'm sure we'll be talking about this. Yeah, more. But is
No, that's
there
enough.
anything else you want to?
You can.
Anything
So you got Washington?
tonight?
No, I don't, my conversation would go into like a more general area of like enforcement. From my perspective, I'm always concerned about people who are doing things to their homes who are not doing anything as far as this commission goes. They don't come before it, and they don't even get a building permit. They just do the work,
Every day?
And if you talk about penalties are really high on those people. At least people who come here are trying to do the right thing.
They address me out. There's a couple of things here, and this would be kind of getting back into the weeds, so I'm not really going to do it, but under the old one, it was talked about the agreed under the back outline, they agreed that the establishment of historic districts prerequisites. See that it says, I'll read this one line. Prior to establishment of the historic district in the city of town, an investigation and report on the historical and architectural significance of the building structure site be included in the proposed historic district or districts shall be made by a historical district study committee and by a historic district commission. And at one point, not too many years ago, that was argued that it would be challenged by law that we were not able to do. Whereas we had done that function before, we would determine something historic by our knowledge and our investigation, and sometimes we didn't go to a third party. If we all felt as a commission that this was the case, that we would hope that it was, and we would submit that meeting as the report, right? And that's part of the problem that we ran into is that I don't want to say the legal department, I don't think they made a ruling on it, but there was a challenge that doesn't fulfill that the commission doing that, it doesn't fulfill the standard written here, where prior to my being here and for the first 5 or 6 districts we did while I was here, nobody ever argued the standard, and then they went there. Yeah, that's part of where this all came from.
Right, and it started over at the municipal.
So I certainly argued my case strongly, as you might imagine. I can do sometimes when I think there's a case to be made, and but nothing. We never heard back, so it didn't become anything more. But it did put us problems. Because if we're not able to determine, if someone can read, if an attorney can read this and say, you can't do it.
Then why was this committee even established?
Well, it's not an all or none thing. It's a something where it just means we have to reach to I'm going to say uninterested, might not be right, but somebody who doesn't have any skin in the game to give an objective report.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the argument. But if we could solve that problem, most of what people said, let's put this on the record, most of whatever they said here, I'm going to agree. I'm not sure the solution. And it's going to take, I'm going to go back through this. I have a copy of this at home, the old one. I'm going to put them side by side and go through them because there's stuff in here that I think belongs in here and things are here, I thought. And, I think it just, I mean, we had to have this meeting in the public speak up, but it's gonna get more complicated next meeting.
But I think we'll have another public hearing.
Absolutely, yeah. Anything we discuss has gotta be public hearing. But, let me just say, since I was late, I appreciate you guys hanging in here for the 10 minutes. Yeah, I'll try not to be late to the next meeting. But, you know, we want to hear, we want to hear our opinions, we want to hear suggestions. But it doesn't mean I have any idea how that's gonna end up.
New construction guidelines, they coming along?
Well, I was gonna mention that earlier, the reason I stalled that, tell you what, you know, you've been here. I stalled that because I didn't think a 4-person commission should make those guidelines. I wanted at least 6 or 7 for everything, just so we would have a broader range of opinion, instead of just the 4 of us, or 4 people who come almost every meeting. And so I delayed trying 5, and then we got a couple of new people. I don't want to say it was, then this, you know, we had, when this issue came up, we had them, I had the file at home, we had them almost completed. But this became the priority. And after this, that would be the next priority. And could we intertwine them a little bit to maybe speed it up, maybe? I don't know. That's what it gets to be, you know, I'm sitting at home working for 6 or 8 or 10 hours.
Yeah, of course.
That's a lot of time.
Are you going outside for it, or are you going to do it yourself?
No, we have it in.
Well, I remember like 5 years ago with Judith and Brian. When
we had a pretty good document that, yeah, we had part of it we was, I want to say, misplaced. A final kind of thing when Julissa.
Yeah, Julissa had kind of the
final. We don't know where, because she was the Andrew of the day.
Yeah.
Right. And they're very good at Julissa. Wonderful what they do for us. Do for and but we had a pretty good that we had a meeting kind of like this where we said, okay, here are all things, and hand them off to her, and then she went.
Well, in McKnight, you had 2 new properties in the last meeting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You know, so
Yeah.
That's it. That's it for.
I think you're right. One update, small, on the certificate of hardship.
Yeah.
E2, no ICC battleship. The written, it's justifying the hardship.
Yeah.
It talks about a comparison form from a third party.
Mm-hmm.
I would suggest putting that the requirement is like 3, you know, from at least 3 contractors. A lot of times we get somebody that comes in with one alternative. They go, oh, I got one price to do the windows, and it was $180,000. Or like, do you call anybody else? This is all you have. You have one handwritten proposal from somebody.
Not signed.
So I would suggest the threshold be a little more defined, more than 1.
I changed A to 3 rating comparison.
Right. It's also like the standard thing. You're supposed to get 3 estimates, right? So it's not like it's just a general business rule. So it makes sense to.
I'll tell you what, that gives me a lot more homework. Okay, so
Right.
this is what you needed.
I don't mind. I just it depends on how much I do.
So to take it back to the public, thank you for coming, for your comments. We do have couple things to discuss. We have a quorum call for June 26th. I will be present. Walter.
You're darn tootin', I will.
John too, like that. Judith, Saul, you'll be here.
Yep.
June, thank you.
Yep.
Vincent. Hold on, just accept June Vanna.
Yes.
Good chance.
Yes, I expect to be here.
Perfect. I open to motion to adjourn.
So
Second, okay.
Yeah.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.